everyone, and welcome back to the Crash-A-Thon, and man am I excited because today we're covering Crash 4. Yeah, I didn't even know it was out either, but I've got it right here, and man, I cannot wait to get into this. Oh, fuck. After the original trilogy and CTR's success and Crash Bash's mixed reception, the original PlayStation era of Crash Bandicoot had come to an end, though along with it, a new generation of consoles had begun, so of course there was high expectations for a new Crash game. Keeping in mind though that Naughty Dog had jumped ship at this point to create new projects, so Universal had to hand the reins to someone else. Their choice was Traveller's Tales, a developer commonly known nowadays as the LEGO Corporation's bitch. Now they're a fairly decent choice. They had a pretty good track record creating some fantastic Disney licensed games for the PS1, and also being known for making games such as, oh dear. Now after Mark Cerny originally pitched an idea for the game to Universal, they dismissed it in favour of forcing Traveller's Tales into playing it safe and creating a more traditional Crash game. However, they only gave them 12 months of development. And remember, this was not only Traveller's Tales' first time working with Crash, but also with the new generation hardware, since this was also Crash's first multi-platform stint appearing on the Xbox and GameCube as well as the PlayStation 2. So Traveller's Tales had a lot on their shoulders, and with only 12 months of development, the end result was what we know as Crash Bandicoot: The Wrath of Cortex. And yeah, on release, the game was met with an overwhelming cry of eh. Though as the years went on, its reputation amongst the fan base only seemed to become more infamous, to the point where the majority of people I saw talking about it not only didn't like it, but they hated it. For a time, all I heard of this game was that many thought of it as the lowest of the low for Crash and that it was truly irredeemable. So today, I want to look back at this one to see if it does have any redeeming quality to it, or if it is indeed the clusterfuck many seem to view it as. The game begins at some miscellaneous point in the future, with the villains all just sitting around with their thumbs up their asses. Uka Uka is fairly pissed off at them for, well, being shit at what they do. They bitch and moan that the problem is Crash constantly stopping them, so Uka Uka deduces that the solution is to simply kill Crash. To accomplish that, Cortex has been working on a secret weapon, another mutated Bandicoot named Crunch, intended to be vastly superior to Crash. In order to bring him life and give him power, however, Uka Uka suggests releasing a group of ancient masks called the Elementals, and with that, they begin their plan. Also, I think all the graphical budget went towards rendering Cortex's pearly whites here, because, well, they definitely didn't go towards these character designs, that's for sure. Anyway, back on Earth, as a bunch of natural disasters begin to occur, the good guys realize something is up, so Aku Aku goes to confront Uka Uka, only to then realize that he has set the Elementals free, though to be honest, based on his tone, he doesn't really seem all that worried.
No, not the Elementals. Uka Uka, why did you release them?
Oh fuck, I can't believe you've done this.
So as Cortex sends Crunch to destroy us, aided by the elemental masks, we must collect the crystals to send each of the elementals back into their slumber and defeat Crunch. This then brings us onto the game. So structurally, Wrath of Cortex is practically identical to Crash 3. The Warp Room style progression with 5 levels each, then a boss fight, the linear platforming level style, collecting crystals, gems and relics, the permanent power-ups from beating bosses, and all those standard Crash staples like death roots and bonus paths. However, this game, as I'm sure already many know, threw several new ideas into the fray as well. What this leads to is a game that attempts to play things really safe while simultaneously trying to experiment with a lot of new concepts all at once, which, as you can imagine, does give some very juxtaposing results. It feels somewhat similar to what we know, yet strangely alien at the same time. It is really unusual. Because of this, it does make this game a bit tricky to talk about in a traditional review sense. However, whenever I've seen it talked about or reviewed anywhere else online, the majority seem to cover it level by level due to the differing hit or miss nature of it. And I thought in order to give this game a fair analysis, I'd follow suit in this idea. First up is the Earth Warp Room, where we meet our first mask, the Earth Elemental called Rocco, who is voiced by Thomas F. Wilson. Yes, that's Thomas F. Wilson.
What are you looking at, fuzzhead?
Our first level is Arctic Antics, and it's an absolutely solid opening level. It's well designed, well paced, and introduces a good amount of all the mechanics. The bonus platforms, death routes, a bit of time with the ice physics, some kick-ass music, just overall a great introduction level. Shame that the second level Tornado Valley is shit. It's a flying level very much like Crash Free's flying levels, and as you know, I'm not really a big fan of those as is. But holy shit, this is even worse. It's way too slow and easy, like it takes me ages to move and the enemies barely even leave a scratch on you. Thankfully, level 3 Bamboozled more than makes up for it with a new vehicle type. This is the Atmosphere, and the whole level is traversed by rolling around in it. And hands in the air, I fucking love this. The weight and the physics of the ball just make it so much fun to control. The levels are designed really well around these physics, and it's just fun. It's like a roller coaster ride, and the atmosphere is fantastic. I'm a happy boy. Level 4 Wizards and Lizards returns back to traditional platforming with another great level. The atmosphere and music are once again on point. There's more challenging enemy placement, a way more difficult death route, and we also get the return of the classic chase sequence, running away from this dragon. It's awesome. Level 5 Compactor Reactor starts off pretty well with yet another new vehicle section in this minecart. You have to lean to both avoid and break boxes as you move quickly across the track, and it does require you to focus and react fast enough. It does kind of fall on its arse though, funnily enough, when it gets to the platforming section. The level design here is way too flat, dulcet, and wide with barely any challenge. You can just walk around most of the enemies, making them a complete joke. You okay there, buddy? I'm over here, but I guess if you want to keep throwing your things, that's good too. Okay, I'm gonna yeet you now. It does improve on the side-on perspective sections, but overall, a bit of a letdown. But in some better news, I'm happy to say that this game controls pretty well. I've heard a lot of people complain about these controls and call it floaty, and yeah, I can kinda see where they're coming from. Crash does feel a lot lighter, and it doesn't retain the same weight and zippiness that the original trilogy was known for. But it is still very tight, very responsive, and smooth enough. I never felt that any death was down to the controls whatsoever. Anyway, now on to our first boss fight, and in a twist to the usual boss formula, Crunch is the only boss in the game. Since each warp room is themed around one of the elemental masks, each boss is Crunch powered by that area's respective elemental. So unfortunately, no classic Crash villains to fight here, which honestly does kinda suck. And on the topic of things that suck, our first boss fight, Rumble in the Rocks. You're placed in the atmosphere in this bowl arena with both you and Crunch rolling around it. Your goal is to simply try and hit all these rocks rolling around to turn them all blue to hurt Crunch. Yeah, we're essentially blue balling him. However, while these atmosphere physics work in their designated levels, it doesn't quite work here. Hitting the balls can be way more annoying than it should be, and since Crunch can hit them and turn them into his own colour, it means you have to wait until you can hit those ones again, and god, it just drags more than anything. Also, to cap this shit off, your reward is a new power-up which allows you to sneak on specifically placed lines of nitro crates. And get this, it's used perhaps no more than 5 times in the game.
Yay!
Anyway, moving on to the Water Warp Room with the Water Mask Wawa, voiced by R. Lee Ermey. Yes, that R. Lee Ermey.
Now let me see your war face!
Yeah! Level 6 Jungle Rumble takes things a bit more back to basics with a jungle-themed platforming stage, though again with occasionally still wide and bland level design. Halfway through though, we do get a good old chase sequence, but this time in yet another vehicle, this Jeep, and it is however very bouncy and fun to control. Level 7 Seashell Shenanigans, however, is anything but fun. It's a return to the diving levels from Crash 3, which I already didn't like that much. So imagine they made it 10 times fucking worse, and yeah, you get this. My god, this level sucks. The area of movement is way too big and wide, and all the enemies move way faster than you do, making them unfairly hard to avoid. And they just pack this level to the brim with so much bullshit, mainly these falling mines that are tucked away out of sight and are so annoying. Halfway through though, it then forces you into this submarine, which makes it even worse as it's even slower and less maneuverable, and oh god, how can it be this shit? Thankfully, level 8 Banzai Bonsai brings us back to a fantastic platforming level where for the first time we can play as Coco in a platforming stage. Granted, she isn't as agile as Crash as she can only spin, single jump and do this pathetic little swipe kick, but the level is designed around this and it's a very varied stage with plenty of different platforming sections, great use of different perspectives and a really rich atmosphere. Definitely one of the best levels the game has to offer. Unfortunately, the next level, That Sinking Feeling, brings us back into the shitty flying style, and again they somehow make it worse than last time. Granted, the enemies here are way more aggressive, but instead of a rapid fire to take out these targets, you have to slowly lock onto each one to fire a shot. And in order to destroy these targets, you have to hit each of them 3 times. It's boring, it's shit, it sucks. Next. The last level of this warp room is H2O No, and it starts off pretty crap with more of that dreadful submarine, but then migrates back into some decent, tight, and reasonably challenging platforming. Now, you may have begun to notice some of the issues with this game, being that Wrath of Cortex has thrown a lot at us so far despite only being about 10 levels in, and it's a common thing that you'll notice more as we go along. The game has jumped constantly between different gameplay styles and has introduced a lot of them in a short space of time. While some of these, like the Atmosphere, play really well, others very clearly don't. And because it likes to keep throwing these new ideas in constantly on top of trying to recreate the platforming, it leads it to being a rather unfocused game, constantly fluctuating in quality, and this is one of the biggest problems with Wrath of Cortex as a whole. Anywho, onto our second boss against Crunch, Drain Damage. Here you simply have to jump on these platforms to get to Crunch while avoiding his attacks. Now, I always struggled with this boss so much as a kid. I could never beat him, and I had to get my older brother to do it for me. Nowadays though, yeah, it's a piece of piss. Next up is the Fire Warp Room, helmed by the Fire Elemental Pyro, who is voiced by Mark Hamill. Yes, that Mark Hamill.
I'm crazy enough to take on Batman, but the IRS, no, thank you.
Honestly, I'm just surprised at some of the voice talent they got on for this. The first level of this warp room is the Gauntlet, another really solid platforming level, which is very much what it says on the tin, a medieval gauntlet of platforming with many hard hazards to avoid. Following that is Tsunami, placing us once again in control of Coco. Unfortunately, it's not a touch on Banzai Bonsai, as the platforming is nowhere near as well designed. And despite the cool chase sequence running away from a tsunami, the level is over extremely quickly and just kind of comes and goes with no enjoyment. Next up, Smokey and the Bandicoot, where we race in the Jeep from before. And I don't mind it honestly, the Jeep's bouncy and slidey feel are definitely more preferable to the stiff and restrictive controls of the motorbike from Crash 3. It's not perfect, but an okay level I guess. Up next is Eskimo Roll, and we're back in another fantastic Atmosphere stage, a lot more tricky than the last one. This time the obstacles and hazards being more densely packed in, causing you to have to tackle it a bit more tactically. Oh, and the Crash 3 bosses are here. They're a complete fucking joke, but they're here. We then end this warp room with Fahrenheit Frenzy. Once again, the level starts us in another new vehicle, the Copter Pack. Though to be fair to it, it does control very well, but unfortunately the level design in this section is pretty naff and lasts all but a minute or so before going back to platforming, which again, like Compactor Reactor, is a bit too spread out for my liking. It's definitely better with more hazards to avoid, but again, pretty At least it has this cool section where you go into an x-ray machine, and it's a pretty neat visual touch. And it actually gives me a good excuse to move on to talking about the game's presentation. Now, as we had briefly touched upon earlier, these character models look like arse. While yeah, the environments are fine enough with some nice details here and there, the character models especially just look so plasticky, stiff, and just ugh, it really strips all the expression and charm that we loved from a lot of these characters to begin with. Also, since I'm playing the original Xbox version, Crash looks like he's covered in pubes. To make up for these atrocious looks, however, let's talk about the game's soundtrack. My god, honestly, the music isn't what you'd expect from Crash based on the music from the original trilogy, but damn is it awesome. It's composed by Andy Blythe and Martin Jostra, who composed a lot of the PS1 games Traveller's Tales worked on, and their work is fantastic. And here, it's no different. To only be able to share a few of these tracks feels like a crime, it's that good. Just creamed myself. Our third boss, Crashes to Ashes, picks up the quality a bit from the previous fights. Here you're running away from Crunch as he throws boulders at you in order to reach this mech, in which you then have to chase and attack him. It's a pretty good way of utilizing the chase segment as a boss fight. A little repetitive, but a decent fight overall. Next up, we have the Air Warp Room with the Air Elemental Lolo, who is voiced by Jess Harnell, who funnily enough is the current voice of Crash. Shame that Lolo as a character though is just...
Is there a draft in here?
shit. Our first level in this warp room is Avalanche. Once again, as Coco, it features a decent, albeit brief, platforming section with this fun little ice shoot part, to then move on to a chase sequence on a snowboard, complete with a little side task of going through each of these flags. A brief and easy, but somewhat decent stage. Next is Droid Void, which is seemingly off to a good start, and look, the monkey bars return, and oh fuck. Why? Why make it this slow? How on earth do you go from the quick and fun zippiness of this to this? How can you go about making something so simple worse? How do you fuck it up that badly? I'm honestly more impressed than anything how they managed that. So yeah, as if the first half with these slow-ass monkey bars wasn't bad enough, it then forces you into this slow-ass mech which is really restrictive in its movement. And in order to attack and to clear the path ahead, you have to use this really shitty version of the fruit bazooka. Oh, this level just sucks, honestly. With our next one, Crash Droids, we're back in a flying stage, thankfully an improvement over the last two. We play as Coco shooting down space stations. It's still not as fast as I'd like, but with rapid fire weapons, it's nowhere near as slow as that sinking feeling, and the challenge is much more balanced compared to the piss take of Tornado Alley. Sadly, it all goes fuck up straight after with Coral Canyon. Another underwater level. You start in the submarine and it's just more of the same bullshit as before, just longer and more drawn out. I hate it, it makes me want to die. Next! Capping off this warp room is Wuthering Heights, which takes place in an airship. An okay stage that again has those shitty monkey bars, but it's not terrible. Though it was here that I noticed a detail that each of the final levels in each warp room is a base of Cortex's themed around that warp room's elemental theme. That's a cool touch. And that's one thing I have to give credit to Wrath of Cortex for, its presentation variety. The elemental theme of the game provides a lot more unique locations for levels, and thanks to the use of different environmental visuals and a unique soundtrack for each and every one, it makes each level feel distinct in that regard, and that's really awesome. Our fourth boss, Atmospheric Pressure, puts us in the flight style again, akin to Engine's boss fight from Crash 3, where this time we have to avoid Crunch's attacks and hit his weak spots as he's attacking. Unfortunately, unlike Engine, these attacks are really slow and not that aggressive, making the boss a bit of a slow burning easy drag. A visually very cool one, mind you, but just overall, eh. This then takes us on to our 5th warp room, starting off with Crash and Burn, an awesomely atmospheric level themed around an erupting volcano. The design is really good with some awesome platforming and the challenge is decently balanced, just good shit. Next up is Gold Rush, a quite uniquely themed Wild West level that focuses again on platforming. Unfortunately though, it's more on the shitty side of the spectrum here, as the level design is mostly flat and barren. It also has this pointless pump car section in the middle and the return of the ungodly slow monkey bars, and this level is just way too long and drags on. A shame really, considering the really cool theming. This brings us on to Medieval Madness, another solid Atmosphere level with great theming, more tight level design to traverse, and while again we have to witness the Crash-free bosses be as effective at their jobs as a tissue paper condom, it's still a nice level. It's just a shame that Crate Balls of Fire, love that name, forces us back into more terribly slow monkey bar platforming and the mech suit once again. Though with a bit more of a saving grace this time, as it actually has this really fun chase sequence in the middle with the mech, and to its credit, it's designed with the mech's more restrictive movements in mind. Finally, we cap it off with the Cortex Vortex, your traditional, challenging, tough platforming gauntlet of a final level, and it delivers. It's well designed and it's a great round off that utilizes all your abilities. Bringing us on to the final boss, Crunch Time, a fairly solid fight to end on, as Crunch jumps on these platforms to activate an elemental power that you have to avoid, such as a meteor shower, electrical fences, fiery panels, and they're all activated in quick succession to keep it challenging and engaging. Upon beating the final boss, we once again receive the Crash Dash for the time trials, which I did indeed do, since the relics once again open up a secret warp room with extra levels. Yep, we're not done yet, lucky me. First of these secret levels is Nighttime, and it's honestly one of the laziest levels in the whole game. It's the exact same level as the Gauntlet, copied and pasted, except this time you play as Coco, it's in the dark, and there's some different hazards and box placements. Honestly, I don't know how this could be any worse.
How could this happen to me?
Next up is Ghost Town, an absolute joke of a level. Infamous for the fact that you can just pop your controller down, do diddly fuck all, and still win. Christ alive. This is then followed by Ice Station Bandicoot, an incredibly brief race against this polar bear on the copter pack. Honestly, nothing that special. Next up is Solar Bowler, another Atmosphere stage, though admittedly the weakest one yet. The setting is really cool, but the design is just really flat, barren, and boring compared to the others before it. And the final level, Forces of Nature, has us as Coco snowboarding down a hill, and it's something. The weird design and camera angle make it very unusual to play, and while it controls fine enough, it's fairly slow paced and a bit of a drag because of it. Honestly, this whole last warp room kind of reeks of, oh shit, we still need 5 more levels, but with no time to make anything, let's just slap together whatever shit we can. So with all the gems, you can fight the final boss once again to get the full ending. Uka Uka is pissed off at Cortex for failing once again and tries to fire a blast at him, but Cortex ducks out the way and it causes the space station they're on to begin self-destructing. This happens just as Crunch realizes he is no longer under Cortex's control. Coco helps him and Crash escape and they all have a generic tidy wrap-up. And we find Cortex and Uka Uka's escape pod to have left them stranded in the middle of the Arctic.
The end.
And that was Crash Bandicoot: The Wrath of Cortex. So, how did I find the game overall? Well, do I think it's a good game? No. But at the same time, I wouldn't say it's a bad game either. I've kind of spoken about my experience with it as a whole, both positively and negatively in equal measure, and that's for good reason. On the platforming side of things, when it sticks to and manages to nail the core Crash gameplay, it's genuinely very good and has some great stages to offer. At the same time though, it also has plenty of poorly designed and lackluster platforming stages. Same with the vehicles, like Crash Avalanche 3, it tries to implement a lot of new concepts into the game, but this time to an even bigger and messier extent. When they devote full, well-designed levels to these concepts, they turn out really fun and enjoyable. But again, because they are throwing so much shit to the wall at once and hoping it sticks, the majority of the vehicle concepts are crammed in with not much thought and not a lot of time to refine and expand them before moving on to the next one. And while the game has some brilliant level themes and one of the best soundtracks to come out of the franchise, it also simultaneously feels like a much less charming and blander shell of the original trilogy. So yeah, for me, Wrath of Cortex is a complete overall meh. To its credit, when it gets it right, it really gets it right, but when it fucks it, it really does bugger it up. And that's why I guess a lot of others cover this game level by level because of the constantly fluctuating quality and style. I feel it's a shame though that a lot of people tend to put a lot more emphasis on the negative aspects of Wrath of Cortex and let it overshadow the good stuff. Cause there is still some really great levels and ideas to come out of this game. And I do not blame the game's shortcomings at all on Traveler's Tales. The game's issues were a result of Universal forcing a messy and botched production, leading to a product that instead of innovating the franchise offered equal amounts good solid additions to an already established platforming style and a couple of great new concepts, as well as a bunch of rushed, messy and even downright terrible levels that overall makes for such a painfully average experience on the whole. So yes, I did just spend over 20 minutes meticulously going over every single aspect of this game, only to come to the conclusion of meh. Yeah, it's not the big next-gen evolution of Crash that we had all hoped for, but I don't think it deserves to be written off entirely and is by far not the worst the series had to offer. It's just that it's such a mixed bag of a game that makes you have to go through just as much shit in order to experience the good it has to offer. And so with the attempt of following the original formula having seemingly failed, where could the series go from here? I don't know, but I think I'm gonna enjoy it.